thoughtful. In every age, value is more than numbers. It is a mirror of the human soul. By the middle of the 19th century, the machine had become both marvel and master. Its rhythm set the pace of life. Its hunger defined the measure of progress. The factory was not just a building, it was an idea, the belief that efficiency could replace virtue. Karl Marx stood before this new cathedral of industry, notebook in hand, and wondered what it did to the human spirit. In Manchester and London, he had seen men and women who no longer crafted, they operated. They no longer worked with their hands, but through them. The product of labor was no longer a reflection of the worker's mind. It was a stranger, sold to someone else, stripped of memory and meaning. He called this loss alienation, Entfremdung, a word heavy with exile, the feeling of being a foreigner in one's own life. To be alienated, Marx wrote, is to labor not as a creator but as a function, to give the best of one's hours to something that gives nothing back. The old craftsman once carved wood, stitched leather, baked bread, and saw himself in the finished form. The factory worker pulled a lever, turned a screw, and went home with nothing of himself left in the product. The act of creation, once sacred, had been divided into fragments so small that no one could see the whole. Work had become both necessary and meaningless. Marx broke this alienation into 4 wounds. First, man is separated from the product of his labor. Second, from the process of production itself. Third, from his fellow workers. And fourth, the deepest, from his own essence as a creative being. The very power that defines us, the capacity to shape the world, had been turned into a means of survival. The worker feels himself only outside work, he wrote, and in work feels outside himself. To rest was to live, to labor was to disappear. A paradox born not of laziness, but of design. For if the product belongs to someone else, so too does the purpose. This was not a sentimental argument. Marx was not longing for the past, for guilds or candles. He was diagnosing a disease of purpose, a world where man became a tool for his own tools. Machines were not evil, they were indifferent. It was the social order that placed the living beneath the lifeless. In one factory, he watched workers feed raw cotton into steel mouths that never slept. The machines whirred, shuddered, hissed, a language of motion without mercy. Children tied threads beneath spinning gears, their small fingers nimble enough to reach where adults could not. One slip, one cough, one blink too slow, and the machine reminded them of its appetite. The owner called it progress. Marx called it sacrifice. Each accident was a prayer to an iron god, the price of keeping production holy. But Marx was too sharp to stop at pity. He wanted to know why a society would accept such rituals, why the worker obeyed, why the factory ruled, why the rhythm of profit could silence the rhythm of the heart. His answer was unsettling, because alienation feels normal once it becomes routine. The system does not need to convince the worker he is free, it only needs to keep him too tired to ask. Alienation, Marx realized, was not simply economic, it was psychological. When a person's worth is measured by output, his silence becomes survival. To question the order is to risk the wage, so the mind adapts, it stops asking. The spirit shrinks to fit the shift. In his notebooks, Marx wrote with something like mourning. The object which labor produces stands opposed to it as an alien power. He meant that our creations, our machines, our institutions, even our governments, begin as extensions of our will, but end as masters of it. The more we build to free ourselves, the more we depend on what we've built. Freedom becomes infrastructure. In this way, alienation is not a tragedy of the 19th century alone. It is the modern condition, from assembly line to algorithm. A programmer typing in a glass tower may feel the same distance from his work as a spinner in a mill. Both shape a world they do not own, guided by metrics they did not choose. Alienation survives not because it is cruel, but because it is efficient. Systems that separate the thinker from the doer, the planner from the performer, can scale infinitely. But they also scale emptiness. A society that perfects means and forgets ends becomes a mirror maze of purpose without meaning. In Marx's time, alienation spread through smoke and soot. In ours, it spreads through screens and speed. Yet the feeling is the same, the quiet ache that your work does not belong to you, that your days are spent maintaining a system too vast to question. The irony, Marx thought, was that capitalism did not only exploit labor, it colonized imagination. It trained people to dream of better wages instead of different worlds. To ask not, why this system, but how can I survive it? That, he wrote, is the final triumph of alienation, when even hope speaks its language. And yet, within this critique lies something tender. Marx believed that man was not meant to be a cog, but a composer, a being whose joy comes from shaping the world according to a vision. In creating, he said, man confirms himself as a species being. Work, rightly arranged, is not punishment, it is expression. It is how we leave fingerprints on eternity. This is why alienation wounded him so deeply, because it turned creativity into compulsion. He saw a world where the factory dictated tempo, the clock replaced the conscience, and the pursuit of profit silenced the pleasure of making. He was not against labor, he was against its distortion. Could machines ever liberate rather than enslave? Marx thought yes, but only if ownership and purpose changed hands. Technology was not destiny, it was potential. The same engines that drove exploitation could, under different relations, drive abundance. But that transformation would require not invention, but introspection. We make our tools, he said, and afterward our tools make us. The question is, what kind of beings do we wish to become? Do we design machines that serve the worker, or workers who serve the machine? Alienation, for Marx, was not a prophecy of doom, but a mirror held to civilization. He wanted us to see the cost hidden inside the comfort, the price of treating labor as a line item rather than a life. The tragedy is not that machines replaced men, but that men began to think of themselves as machines. In his later years, he would watch with sorrow as industry marched on, deaf to its own critique. The world adopted his vocabulary, not his warning. Factories multiplied, alienation scaled, and the 20th century would prove him both right and wrong. Right about the system's power, wrong about its end. Because the machine did not die. It evolved into networks, corporations, algorithms. Its gears are digital, its pulse invisible, its reach infinite. And still, somewhere, a worker, or a coder, or a creator whispers the same quiet question Marx once asked. Where did my day go? Perhaps that is why his writing endures, because alienation is not a relic, but a reflection, a reminder that progress without purpose is merely acceleration. That a faster world is not necessarily a freer one. The cure, Marx believed, was not nostalgia, but ownership, reclaiming the right to see yourself in what you create. A society is healthy not when its output grows, but when its members recognize themselves in its fruits. And so, even now, his words echo through our industries and institutions. The question is not whether machines will rule us, but whether we will remember what they were built for. Tools should serve the soul, not the schedule. In that simple reversal lies the possibility of redemption. The moment when humanity pauses, looks at its own reflection in steel and code, and remembers, the purpose of production was always life itself. This is Masters of Value, the echo of ideas that built our world. Next time, we march into revolution, the spectre of revolution. How words became weapons, how 1848 lit the fuse of Europe, and how Marx's vision met the chaos of history. What happens when an idea meant to free the world becomes the spark that divides it?